I'd like to offer a particular welcome to Mrs. Claire Hensman, Lord Lieutenant of Cumbria, who I haven't seen yet, but I know is on her way. David Beebe, High Sheriff of Cumbria and also Chairman of the Community Foundation. And we expect Julie Barton, also our most recent past High Sheriff, to be with us. And also special welcome to Edwin Booth, one of the Foundation supporters, but also High Sheriff of Lancashire. Welcome to you all. So this is our third Voices from the Frontline event, and we hold these events to shine a light on the challenges facing people in our communities. We also do it to share how we're working with our partners across the county and to let our fund holders and supporters see how we're spending their money. Now, everyone has been adversely affected in some way by the pandemic, but most particularly those people who were already struggling. And those include families on low incomes, people with mental health issues and other health problems. But today, our special focus is on how the pandemic has affected young people. So we've brought together a number of speakers and a group of young people who together describe what living through the pandemic has meant for them. Our first speaker is Andy Slattery, Assistant Chief Constable and Chair of Cumbria's Strategic Response to the Pandemic. We'll also hear from Jenny Benson, the Foundation's Director for Programmes and Partnerships, describing the Foundation's response to date, and also from Judith Schafer, Head Teacher and Chair of the Cumbria Alliance of System Leaders, who will discuss the challenges faced in education and digital exclusion. Now, the conversations that happen today, alongside information gained at meetings we've held already with young people and youth organisations, will directly influence and shape how we spend our grant-making funds in the future. Now, many of you may ask at the end of this evening, how can I help? So we have several ways people can support our work, and a link to the giving options is included in the chat feed, and we'll also send them out with a follow-up email. Now, our audience this afternoon contains a number of fund holders, individual, family, corporate and Cumbria Club members. If you are one of those, thank you. We simply can't make the grants we do without your support. If you're sitting there and you're not already a supporter, please consider joining us as a member or contact me or Jackie Curry, our Head of Development at the Foundation, to discuss how you might like to be involved. As well as giving money, we support people actually getting involved hands-on. It's not all about money. We are very keen on time, talent and treasure. So if you know someone or you would like to be involved in a practical way, I'd like to suggest you contact Becky Wolstenholme at Cumbria Youth Alliance, who can signpost you to a number of volunteering opportunities. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Assistant Chief Constable Andy Slattery.
Okay, hello, I'm Andy Slattery. I'm the Assistant Chief Constable at Cumbria Police, and I'm the Chair of the Cumbria Local Resilience Forum. For the past 13 months, I've been chairing the Strategic Coordinating Group for COVID, and just want to give you an update on where we are with the pandemic and what we expect to happen over the next few weeks and months. So Christmas was a very difficult time for all of us, despite the fact that the regulations were eased over Christmas. What we saw early in January was a huge spike in infections, and possibly the worst part of the pandemic. And our hospitals certainly had more people admitted and more people in intensive care than we'd seen throughout 2020. So January was a really, really difficult time. Obviously, the lockdown that came in and the rollout of the vaccination programme have managed to get those rates under control. And we're really pleased to see how rates have fallen in Cumbria. We're really pleased to see how fantastic the vaccination effort from the National Health Service has been to get all of those over 50 offered a vaccine and now under 50. So we really are making progress. And to that end, we've now moved into a different phase. So what I've been chairing has been the response phase. We're now moving into the recovery phase, which is chaired by the County Council. And that's looking at the short, medium and long-term issues to get Cumbria back on its feet, to adapt to a new normality and to really rebuild better. So last week, we formally had the last strategic coordinating group where I handed over the coordination role to Catherine Fairclough. Much of the subgroup structure, much of the doing has moved across. So while we stood some subgroups down because clearly The hospital capacity isn't currently an issue, but obviously managing the data and doing the communications continues to be important as we move into recovery. Particularly when we start to look at the data around mental health issues, around some of the impacts that the lockdown itself had on society, economy, on jobs, and to try and get things back to normal. We're really worried about mental health, particularly as an issue, and the young people in the county are disproportionately impacted by this, whether it means that you haven't had the university experience that you wanted to when you were learning, whether your schooling has been disrupted, whether it's the prospects of moving into work after school and further education are restricted. All of those need to be looked at. We need to support young people through this recovery phase so that we can build back stronger. We can recover from this. Our industries can start to adapt and diversify, and we can make use of the fantastic opportunities we've got with our tourism sector. And there is a silver lining in that. The fact that most people can't travel abroad for holidays means this year is going to be a really, really busy year. It'll be the busiest year, I'm sure, the Lake District in particular has ever seen. And we're starting to see some of that now. So we really want to build back better in the county. We've got a long-term vision for how economy rebuild, about how we become greener as a county, how we become more sustainable in our tourism industry, and how we can really start to rebuild. So there is real hope now, after 13 months of frantic work, responding to the challenges we've had, and responding to the PPE crisis, responding to hospital capacity, the mass vaccination centres, the testing facilities have all had to be set up and managed over the last 13 months. We can now start to move on to something that's more positive. We can start to move on to that recovery phase. So the local resilience forum will sit behind all of this throughout. The strategic coordinating group is stood down, but it can stand up again at an hour's notice should it be needed. We really hope that with the work the NHS has done, particularly around vaccination and hospital capacity and treatment, that we'll never need to for this pandemic. But there's always a possibility of a very serious third wave. There's always a possibility of new variants having a real detrimental impact on case rates. There's always a possibility. And the local resilience forum will work together with our public sector, private sector and voluntary sector organisations. We'll be here throughout to support the recovery effort and to help Cumbria build back better.
Great, thank you, Andy. Hello, I'm Jenny Benson and I'm the Foundation's Director of Programme and Partnerships, and I manage our grant making. So in March 2020, we launched the Cumbria COVID Response Fund as part of the county-wide response that Andy's just outlined. Since that time, we've awarded nearly 3 million in grants to around 200 community groups across the county. I'm just going to briefly cover how we've supported families and young people during this time. COVID-19 has exacerbated existing disadvantage and generated new financial hardship. Through our COVID grant making, we have supported thousands of families, children and young people throughout Cumbria. We've helped families facing food poverty by funding a network of food banks, food hubs and pantries. We've also supported citizens' advice to help families overcome new financial challenges and to access other support, for example, claiming benefits. Vitally, we've helped youth organisations such as South Whitehaven Youth Partnership and the Phoenix Youth Project to work remotely to support young people during each of the lockdowns. It's been an extremely isolating and uncertain and anxious time for many young people. Through the COVID Fund, we've supported a number of organisations providing mental health and wellbeing support. These include Cumbria Youth Alliance, who've helped tackle gaming addiction, Spiral, who have helped young people overcome the effects of bullying, Carlisle and Eden Mind, who have provided therapeutic coaching to address mental health concerns and to build emotional resilience. Details of all our grant awards, together with some fantastic grant stories, will be found on our website. I think Andrew can share the link now. Finally, COVID has exposed the digital divide that many young people in education face. Whilst government support was made available, there were significant gaps in provision in the county. working closely with Cumbria County Council and the Cumbria Alliance of System Leaders, we're able to address some of the gaps by repurposing funds to the value of £100,000 to provide essential IT. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to Judith.
So I've been asked to share my thoughts on what are the needs of young people in Cumbria as a result of the last year's pandemic. First and most important, young people need direction. When you do any outdoor course in navigation or mountain leadership, you're taught about the security of handrails. Handrails are things like fences or walls. If you're lost or in dense fog or a blizzard, from your last known location, you keep walking until you hit the handrail. And once you find it, you can follow it to your destination and out of trouble. Our children have been placed in an educational landscape that is mired in fog, and where the paths they expected to show the way are not there, or at least they've changed. There are no handrails. Even if they could navigate their way to a handrail, like GCSE grades or A levels, that handrail is different and less secure than it should have been. The apparent uncertainty of what's happened in education this year makes the future more uncertain. We need to support children to find the handrails again so they can step forward with confidence in a changed world. For educationalists, part of that handrail is the curriculum we are teaching. Now is an opportunity to think again about what matters. So the second thing, what are we teaching and why? And perhaps just as importantly, what are we leaving out? Young people's voices in this debate need to be heard. What do they need to know? We've seen over the last year that learning is not linear or tidy. We need to react to that and start from where our learners are, not from where teachers think they should be. This pandemic has made us all, young people in particular, question some of the basic tenets of social responsibility, and this is a chance for schools to shift and use that to our advantage. Black Lives Matter, for example, has become a central issue for young people. Education needs to recognise that life is a community, and we need an educational process that allows children to meet and understand and tolerate the culture of others. What is education for? To transmit cultural norms or provide young people with the skills and the self-belief to change those norms and question the status quo. Traditionalists say we should teach children what we have always taught them because our history and culture is our history and culture. But there's a difference between traditional knowledge and powerful knowledge. Powerful knowledge says we should teach children what is powerful for them and explains their world. We need to take the opportunity now, while the curriculum and what children have and haven't learned is under discussion, and talk about what should drive that. And third, if we judge our society by how we treat the most vulnerable people in it, we must make sure that all our young people have the opportunities they need post-pandemic. Schools are seeing more children and young people who are vulnerable than we've seen before, and for a variety of different reasons: mental health and well-being, financial and home security, employment opportunities. But one of the silver linings of the dark cloud of the last year has been the way in which people in Cumbria came together to give some of our most vulnerable children and families more equal access to IT and the internet, and therefore to their education. Cumbria Community Foundation was a hugely important part of the network of individuals, charities and businesses who worked so hard to send out laptops and source funding to buy IT equipment, which meant as many as possible of our young people were not disadvantaged by not having a computer. It was a mammoth task, and we know that that work is ongoing, but we've done our best to level the playing field. We need to keep the momentum going to help the most vulnerable children in our schools. What is needed to help young people move forward is a positive mindset, support and confidence from the adults around them that all will be well, and the practical support to make things possible that seem impossible. Optimism is the most powerful force we have to change the world. We need to make it clear to young people that it will be all right in the end. And if it's not all right yet, it's because it's not yet the end. It's a journey, it's a path, and the handrails will be there if we try hard enough to rebuild them. Thank you.
So thank you, Judith. That concludes the first section of today's event. And thank you to Judith, to Andy and to Jenny for presenting, some important background information, the context in which we're working. I'd now like to introduce Paul Rowe, who leads the Phoenix Youth Project in Cleatormore and Frizzington. And Paul led a fantastic panel of young people. And we're going to have 3 separate recordings followed by a question and answer session. So I'll just hand over to Paul for the first question. He's here in a recorded capacity and he's also here in real life.
So the first question we're going to start with is, tell us, how has lockdown impacted you and your family?
Overall, I'd say pretty negatively, to be honest. I don't think that there's been many positives, just to be brutally honest with that one.
Yeah. What's been the hardest thing?
Well, I suppose me and my friends have all just agreed that we just don't have much motivation to do things, just because, I don't know, I think the environment in general is just pretty dismal, and has been through lockdown. But I don't think there's very much more I can say about that. I think that really speaks for itself. But yeah.
I'd say, the first lockdown, so this time last year, I would have said, and I think my family would have agreed, we actually benefited from it, because within my household, we're constantly or we all live together, but it's we never see each other. So the first lockdown, I feel we definitely became closer, but now I feel we've all gone a bit stir crazy, and it's just constant arguments, especially with my younger brother. He's can I go out with my friends? And my mum just has to constantly argue with him, saying you can't.
Katie, how about yourself? How's it impacted on you?
I think I found the first lockdown harder because I feel it was more strict than the second one, and because I'm living alone, I'm usually around my family quite a lot, but I couldn't see them for weeks on end, and that was awful.
So what have we missed? What have we missed the most during all these lockdowns? Emily?
I'd say not having normal life. It's crazy how much we took for granted. It's crazy to me that at one point there was no such thing as corona. I feel the hardest bit's been trying to actually live with it. It's just became the new norm. I feel it's become much easier now because it's been so long. It's been nearly a year, but at the start it was so hard to readjust.
Yeah.
I would say structure and having a schedule, and also sort of clarity of knowing what's going to happen for next week or the week after that, or just knowing that you've got stuff to do and you're not just going to be at home all day.
So the other part of COVID and this pandemic's been health. So whether it's whether you've had health, whether you've had fears of health, or you've obviously seen people who have suffered with their health, and all these kind of social restrictions, have that brought around times where you've felt anxious, when you've felt worried or scared? Has anyone felt that way because of COVID?
Personally, yeah, definitely. I think it's only humane to have adopted some levels of anxiety through this lockdown. I think going to the shops now, for me personally, is a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, just the risk of getting COVID and passing it on to people close family members that are more vulnerable, and then them catching it has made me pretty anxious.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say the same as Michael. I'm not really worried about myself, but more worried about kind of family members, and not wanting to spread anything to them, but also not wanting them to like suffer too much from loneliness, because, you know, I know a lot of people wouldn't really talk about it if they were struggling. So you need to be there for them, but also you can't like be actually close to them because you can't, you know, unsocially distance.
Great. So I'd now like just to invite Lindsay Buckle, who works at the Youth Zone in Carlisle, just to give her thoughts on those first couple of questions. And then after that, I'll ask, I think we've got a first question to kick off the conversation. And then if anyone would like to put in a specific question, then please put it in the chat and I'll mediate that. So over to you, Lindsay.
Hello, everyone. I've been asked today to sort of fill in the gaps for those young people who don't feel confident enough to express themselves, or perhaps they're not articulate enough. I think for all young people back in March last year, there was a brief novelty. There was a freedom. You didn't have to go to school. And that was quite exciting, I think, for a very, very short period of time. But young people living in overcrowded and temporary housing, this became very quickly a stressful, dark and isolating place to be. We know of young people who referred themselves during this time into care because of domestic violence. They could see no other way out. Brief moments when lockdown restrictions eased, we saw signs of trauma. Even in summer last year, we were seeing signs of increased self-harm, incontinence with some young people, and weight loss. We also know young people from disadvantaged communities have been disproportionately affected in terms of any employment they might have had. They're more likely to have been furloughed or have lost their job entirely. Young people have been financially impacted as well, even those younger ones that have stayed at home. The cost of living with everybody under one roof now has gone up. And for those young people who previously weren't used to being disadvantaged, the delivery of food parcels or community help turning up on your doorstep brought with it feelings of shame. Other marginalised young people that we work with were already vulnerable and isolated, and their experiences were just made all the more acute. We're thinking here of the young carers who then suddenly faced additional responsibilities on top of the responsibilities that they were facing way before their years, because they had parents that might have been shielding. We also think of the young people who come from the refugee community who make up some of our membership. Prior to COVID, they relied on networks of support from cultural communities, get-togethers and events and cook-offs where they could share their language and share their cultural backgrounds. They now faced even more isolation, and some of them were living and isolated in quite intimidating estates. I think for all young people, though, the thing that they missed the most, the common accord, was a space to be themselves. Sometimes that wasn't home. Sometimes home was the place where they felt afraid. And being their authentic self in their friend's house, in a youth group, in a school, that's what they missed.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I would encourage anyone who's got a question to put it in the chat. But the first question I do have already is to Paul Rowe. So this is Paul. How do youth work providers engage with young people who were already vulnerable before COVID-19, but are being missed by local services? These teens risk becoming even more invisible than before.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yeah, this is the real me, as Andy said, rather than the virtual me. It's a bit similar. Yeah, it's obviously these big things, big subjects like mental health is a massive sort of hard-hitting sort of subject and topic, but it's much more than that, really. It's you know, like Lindsay was saying there, I mean, our youth clubs have been closed for 7 months out of the last 12 months. So, you know, for 5 months we've been open, for 7 months we haven't. When we've been open, we've all had to keep away from each other and only have, you know, 15 young people through the door and all this kind of stuff. And so, you know, you can focus on some of the heavy hitting kind of stories, but anyone that was sort of seemingly okay before COVID, you know, can be really struggling now because they haven't had that social outlet. And Andy's mentioned there, those invisible teens, you know, people haven't accessed services, whether it's mental health, whether it's other kind of support services. People haven't accessed them because we were all told to go home and kind of stay away from the virus, really. So the simple message is, if you're vulnerable before COVID, you're more vulnerable now. If you weren't vulnerable a year ago, the chances are you might be now. And we work in very deprived areas, and the real impact of COVID in terms of financial terms hasn't hit yet. So these young people, when furlough ends and job opportunities aren't here, that's when we'll really find this generation of young people, this year's school leavers, next year's school leavers, the lack of opportunity and how we need to support those young people. That's going to be the big kind of sort of thing we need to look at, really. And youth work and youth projects have a massive part to play in that, definitely.
Thank you, Paul. I think I've got one more question, and then we'll move on to the next recording. And this is a question about the actual makeup of the panel. So one of our guests asks that 2 out of 10 of the young people participating in the panel were men. Is this symptom? Sorry, and I'm Becky Wolstenholme. I'm directing this question to you. So pick up your ears. So 2 out of 10 of the panel members were men. Is this symptomatic of the disconnect of young men engaging? And are there any specific programs to reach isolated young men who may find it hard to connect or seek help?
Hello, Andy. I don't think we can say it's just about young men. I think it's important to remember that actually every young person is unique, and at this moment, everybody is affected differently through COVID, and so there are increased anxieties and concern. And picking up on what Paul said about the career prospects as well, that's universal. That's young men and young women, and it includes everybody. So from Cumbria Youth Alliance perspective, firstly, through the support to third sector organisations who play a vital role in local communities, we are looking at youth work training and upskilling local people to enable them to deal with the increase and complexities of issues facing young people coming out of COVID. And that does include some specific programmes for young men, but also other programmes. And that doesn't mean that we're looking to deliver. We're looking at all youth provision and actually the experts who are out there to support them in a partnership way. But we are keen to look at the professional pathway for youth work provision in Cumbria in future, which will provide some young people with career opportunities that maybe haven't been there in the last couple of years. So that's a real positive. Along with this, we know that there will be young people leaving secondary school this year where sixth form isn't the right place for them, like Paul said, and they're not ready for college and need a positive destination. And there are a wide range of third sector organisations who do support all young people and these particularly vulnerable young people as well. Many of those organisations are within our networks. So it's not about duplicating an offer, but maybe possibly providing a more clear pathway of opportunities for young people. To look at diversification in Cumbria is important, and certainly working in partnership to provide the best possible services for all young people in Cumbria.
Thanks,
so I think
Becky.
that's really important.
Great, thank you. Just before we move on, I hope people have seen the very helpful comment from Edwin about reducing stigma and use of food banks, which I think Jenny mentioned both food banks, food projects and food pantries earlier on, and we've seen a huge take up, and sadly they've been very much needed, and we've been able to support those. So I think, Andrew, we have one other question. We'll pick that up later. I think because of time, we'll move on to the next recording, please.
Do you think there's enough support for young people who need mental health support? Is there enough support out there?
I did actually reach out for help with a couple of my pals, and we just got absolutely nothing back, really.
So who did you reach out to then, if you don't mind me asking?
It was First Step. I don't know if you've heard of them. And basically, they did like this entire kind of questionnaire thing with me to kind of understand where I was coming from. And then I got a call back the next week later, and they basically said to me, you haven't had enough history on like medication to get counselling or anything like that. So you've got to be on drugs to be sick enough for them,
Right.
basically. But yeah.
So I suppose that wasn't what you were looking for, and wasn't the help and support you wanted.
No, not really.
What do other people think? You know, has everyone got any? Yeah, Beth?
Well, I don't personally I haven't really struggled myself with mental health, but seeing my friends struggle with mental health issues and trying to reach out for support and seeing them not getting it, it's really difficult. And I think that most young people now go to other young people for support for their mental health. Like my friends would reach out to me rather than reaching out to like a mental health helpline or something like that.
Yeah, so I think that mental health services should focus a little bit more on people that don't have like major issues. Like what May was saying, like you shouldn't need to, you know, be in like real dire straits to get any help. It should be there, you know, to stop you from getting to that point. I like to see more of a focus on that kind of aspect.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, you know, the anxiety and the lower end stuff is still huge for somebody, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, especially at the moment.
How's home learning or homeschooling? How's it gone? So I know, Andrina, you were saying you don't feel prepared. So, you know, for exams in the way that you should be. So how's home learning been this year?
Well, in the first lockdown, I didn't really do any home learning because I wasn't in my GCSE years, so I didn't really find it as important. But when I was doing it in the most recent lockdown, it's so hard to keep on top of it, because I feel like anyway, when you're in those GCSE years, even if without a pandemic going on, it's hard to keep on top of it and like revise all your subjects. But then you're doing that at home with your teacher online, and like you're basically teaching yourself with a PowerPoint being shown to you.
Well, for most of my GCSE years, last year I was in year 10, so because they still thought we'd have exams this year, we got so much home learning to do because obviously we were just preparing for GCSEs. But even this year in year 11, we're getting more and more and more work set for home. And it's not the same as being in a classroom. You really can't learn as much sat looking at a computer as you could being taught by a teacher.
Yeah, yeah.
I agree with basically what everyone's saying. Like, it was very hard to motivate yourself to do it all over again. Like, every day was literally the same. And just staring at a computer and your teacher just speaking, it wasn't really learning. And obviously it's very difficult to teach yourself because it's not that effective. And that just made everything about GCSEs worse, because it just like added to that anxiety of like being at home, teaching yourself and everything.
So again, I'm here to fill in the gaps. Paul mentioned thereabouts what support was available, and they were talking there specifically about mental health support, but there was a range of different areas of support, whether it was youth groups, whether it was community hubs and the community self-starter groups that appeared all over the county. So there has been some support, but what we should be thinking is, how do you get to know about that support, particularly if you are from a background which is marginalised? What happens if the people that you rely on, your family, your parents, aren't responsible people? What happens if they're thinking of themselves rather than their children? What happens if your only window of opportunity is shared with an online classroom, or with that face that's dropping off a food parcel once a week? If your only window of opportunity is public, you're less likely to ask the question. We know there has been some support out there, but if only you have the means to access it. Maybe also you don't know that you need help. Maybe the situation that you're in feels so hopeless that you've just resigned yourself to it. Or maybe you don't know how to articulate for the help that you need. When it comes to homeschooling, A lot of this relies on resources and having a supportive home which can provide you with the structure and the discipline to do it. It's fantastic if you have some self-motivation, but a lot of young people, particularly from deprived homes, do not have that. If you're struggling to attend school under normal circumstances, then homeschooling is not going to be the place where you're going to start to engage in education. The most deprived young people that we've been talking to over this last 12 months, these are the type of young people who do not want to talk, who want to stay in the communities where they're living. The ones that are being blamed for antisocial behaviour because they hang around with their friends. Those young people are telling us and openly admitting to us that they haven't attended any school since any of the lockdowns have begun.
Thank you again, Lindsay. That's really helpful. So as with the last one, I've got, this is the question for Becky. What do you do to improve the career prospects of a young person currently in their final year of secondary school who hasn't been encouraged in home learning and they choose not to go back, particularly in a hostile labour market?
I think again, it is, just to reinforce that, every young person is different, and the situations are different throughout the geography of Cumbria as well, which is really important to consider. And so the pathways are different for all young people. And again, due to COVID, with the increased anxiety and the concerns, that does include career prospects, because they know that the employment levels are likely to reduce in Cumbria. So there's a real anxiety about that. So firstly, it is through partnership working. That's so important. And I feel the third sector organisations play a vital role in local communities to support those young people, with that step into employment and into career prospects. And again, like I said before, to look at providing that quality training, youth work training, and that quality service to young people in the local community settings, and upskilling local people to enable them to deal with these increase and complexities of issues facing young people coming out of COVID. Looking at the professional pathway for youth work provision in Cumbria in the future, which, that will provide career opportunities as well for young people. And those people leaving school in year 11, where it's, they're just not ready. They're not ready to go into college, or sixth form's not the right place for them. It's looking at a positive destination and looking at positive opportunities for those young people to make them ready for their positive destinations. And there are a wide range of third sector organisations, but I think it is clear that we need to get that message out in a more clear and succinct way to young people. There are so many organisations out there offering help, many of whom are within our networks. So it's really important not to duplicate, not to conflict, but about working together to provide that provision, that high quality service to all young people.
Thank you, Becky. I think if people haven't been watching the chat, there was a great question from Fee Wilson, and then even better answer from Michael Priestley. So thank you for that. And it was touching on the point about just where services do exist. We don't have any more questions on the chat and time is rolling on. So Andrew, can I ask you to do the next clip, please?
So the next one I want to talk about is about kind of your future, really. So have your future goals and maybe aspirations and plans changed during the last year because of COVID?
So I think mine's changed quite a lot, because obviously my plan was to kind of audition and go to classes and just keep the dancing up. So it's been about 4 months since I've really done any proper dancing. It's just been at home, which obviously there's not a lot of space. It's not really the same thing. So my plan was obviously to do that, whereas my plan now is just living back up north, and kind of taking each day as it comes and kind of just holding out hope that come July, theatres and kind of things will be happening again. But up to now, I don't really have a plan, honestly. Yeah.
So before COVID hit, you had this plan and you knew where you were going, and now you're just not really sure, and it's up in the air because of COVID.
Yeah, because I don't obviously have college anymore, or I'm not at uni, I don't have school. So for me, it's just trying to keep my head screwed on. Yeah, that's me.
Katie?
This past year has actually been quite positive for me job-wise. I finished my volunteering and started working with CYA, and I've been doing a IAG course alongside that, because I'm starting to think more about where I'm wanting to go like in the future. So I'm focusing a lot more on that. I think I've just got like obviously more time to think about it.
Yeah, a bit like Emily said, you've kind of, you're not doing so much, so you've got time to really think about what you want to do and where you want to go. Yeah, Max, come on, you tell us, how do you think COVID's impacted on your future and your future plans?
Well, I'm qualified to be a paint and decorate, and most of those jobs are pretty much gone, so I can't get anything like that. So I've had to focus on less of the actual goal I want and more on just like getting any type of job, really. So I can't really be choosy with what I want.
What do you see in the future then, Max? What do you think is going to happen in the next kind of 6 to 12 months?
I honestly have no idea. So at that point where it's just either you just don't know until something comes along. Right.
It's actually been quite positive for me as well, to be honest. I was going to do music management, but I'm going to Japan now to teach English. But yeah, COVID has kind of pushed me to get out of the country, I guess. But yeah.
So the last question, I want you to think about something really good and positive. What one thing are you going to do this summer that you maybe couldn't do last summer? Tom?
I'm just really looking forward to going on holiday. Just getting away for a little bit, enjoying the sunshine.
Where you want to go? Where you want to go?
Oh, I want to go, I don't know, somewhere Mediterranean, not too far away, just like, the south of France, go to Cannes, go into a patisserie and speak French, and they respond in English and you're a bit annoyed. It's just little things like that.
Brilliant. What about everybody else? Yeah, Emily?
I just can't wait for the atmosphere, like when this is all over, like the happiness and relief on people's faces, and like going out, I just feel like it'll be so much more appreciated. I can't wait till like the day when it's like it genuinely is all over, because it'll happen one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Azali?
Definitely travel. Like there's loads of my friends that I haven't been to stay with yet, and like go clubbing and like, I don't know, just socialize. Like I feel like because I've traveled with what I've done, like a lot of my friends are across the country, so just to kind of see them all and yeah, socialize, definitely.
Brilliant. Well, that's all we've got for today. So I want to say a massive thank you to all of you, all 10 of you. You've all been fantastic. Thank you for your answers, for your time you've given us today.
Right, so I think that was Paul being harshly edited and cut off in his prime. But I think what's very nice is to just hear that positivity from the young people in that last question. And that was recorded about 6 weeks ago. So that was with the anticipation of what the release of lockdown might be, and hopefully in a safe way, those young people are now able to go out and experience some of those things. So I do just want to ask the final sort of question, which is back to Paul, and that's, we know that young people are committed to actually trying to make change happen themselves. So how do we support and champion them to lead this work in a post-COVID COVID world?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. It was probably better that I got cut off there. I was probably just rambling about something anyway. Well, I think it's going to be more important than ever. You know, we've lived a year of stay away from everybody, stay at home, you know, social restrictions, and you know, there does need to be change. There does need to be community action, social action, bringing people back together. Emily had said there, you know, she can't wait to the day when they can just celebrate and be like, there's no COVID. You know, I don't know when that'll be or where we get there. But young people, as we're seeing sort of globally, are leading some of this change and some of this kind of, you know, the time for kind of like now to talk about climate change and the green agenda and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, and we will have some opportunities in Cumbria, because we've already mentioned the police officer that spoke at the beginning said we're going to have the busiest tourism season ever. So I don't think that'll hit West Cumbria as much. It won't hit Clayton, but it will hit big parts and big swathes of Cumbria. So that will be job opportunities for young people. So that is really, really good. But, you know, I remember, Lindsay, you were saying that young people are getting sort of being sort of tagged with being antisocial for just hanging around with the mates. That's definitely happening locally here. They're just chilling out with the mates. They're on the streets. They're sick of this. They want to see the friends. And they're getting just loads of just really minor stuff on social media. So it'd be really good to give some real powerful, positive stories to say, look how great our young people are. So, you know, I think there's a big, powerful change to unite us all back together in the future.
Thank you, Paul. That's really helpful. I've also had a question. I've just sent a direct message to Elaine Herbert in the chat, but I'm also saying Elaine Herbert twice, just to give her the heads up that I'm directing a question in her direction. And Elaine works for the DWP, and she's involved with the youth hubs, and so she might want to say a very little bit succinctly about what they are, but also to answer a question that I've had about how do local companies and youth organisations actually perhaps contribute towards coaching and mentoring for young people, so they are able to either build their skills and confidence or going to work. So Elaine, I hope that's not too short a notice for a question. I hope you're able to respond.
So we're setting them up in each LA authority, and they are LA led as the leading accounting body, but we're looking at setting them up in the community. So they are there to help the 16 to 24-year-olds. We know from past experience through economic downturn that it is that age range that has the risk of long-term scarring from unemployment. So we have actually launched a couple of our youth hubs, one in Carlisle, which is based in Carlisle College, and one in Barrow, which is based out of Project John. And those are bringing together all our key partners, including local authorities, the County Council, the likes of Inspira and Mind and Cumbria Youth Alliance. We're bringing them all together to work with our cohort of customers who need that wraparound support, who are probably a little bit further away from the labour market than maybe some of our school leavers or those that have been furloughed, that we can pivot quite quickly into employment. They're the ones that are more likely to need kickstart opportunities as well. So they do need that wraparound support, working with a dedicated youth work coach from the job centre and with our stakeholders and partners to be able to get them ready for that labour market.
Thank you, Elaine. I think we've had a number of other sort of questions, and what I'd like to do, because we're running out of time, is actually make sure that we address them to the relevant people and actually pick them up down the line. So I think the final pre-record, sorry, not the penultimate.
And I just need to do a shout out to Jenny. Jenny, definitely a virtual coffee so that we can catch up.
Thank you. No, the final pre-recorded slot was Tom and Azali, who were part of the group, have also benefited from grants from the foundation. And this is just a short clip for them describing how that money's helped them.
We've got just a little question here. This is for Tom and Azali, really. So you two both received a grant from the wonderful, fantastic Cumbria Community Foundation. The foundation both gave you a grant to help with your studies. So, you know, how did that help? And what would have happened if you didn't get that support?
So I think for me, I went to uni when I got that grant, and I think without it, I really would have struggled to just kind of live a normal life, like pay for rent as well as you know, food, clothes, all the essentials that you need, as well as doing things that you want to do. So I think without that grant, I would have really struggled in kind of having to prioritize, like, you know, I don't know, trying to prioritize like doing things that I want to do or things that I need to do in order to like lead a healthy and productive life.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And Asli, how about yourself?
So I basically moved away from home at 16 because I got an offer to a dance school, but basically without the fund from Cumbria Community Foundation, I wouldn't have been able to afford all of the extra costs, you know, all the things that kind of, you know, like dance wear, like even my point shoes, they add up, they're like £50, and I'm dancing. I'd normally be dancing like 7 to 8 hours a day, sometimes more with rehearsals, and you'd get through point shoes in like a week sometimes. So that's £50 a week. I didn't have time to work most of the time I was there. I also did A levels. So it's just, there was so many extra costs. Even being able to like get the train into London, that's like another like 15, 20 quid, however much, to go to the audition or go to a class. And it's kind of keeping yourself up to the same level as all of my peers. So all of my peers will be going to, you know, extra classes all the time. They'll be kind of, you know, having dance wear that makes them stand out in auditions and classes. So it's all of those like little costs that I just wouldn't have been, like even getting tutoring and back at kind of my weekends or half term or whatever, I just wouldn't have been able to do it. I wouldn't have been able to go, full stop. So yeah, I really needed it, and I'm really lucky.
So I think it's really important to say it's not possible to sort of divulge the backstories to Tom and Nazali, but I can just say they are both two absolutely extraordinary individuals who really absolutely needed support from the foundation, have translated that that support, you know, tenfold with the energy that they've put into their life journey so far. So it's been a huge privilege to handle those funds. The final pre-record is now handing over to David Beebe, High Sheriff of Cumbria and Chairman of the Community Foundation, who will share his thoughts on this theme.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Beebe. I have the great privilege to be Chair of the Cumbria Community Foundation, and this year I also have the honour to be the High Sheriff of Cumbria. With both hats on, I am delighted to be able to say a few words today. As High Sheriff, my theme for this year is Better Tomorrows. I have selected this theme because, very simply, I would hope that all we do every day is about improving the foundations of Cumbria to create better tomorrows for all Cumbrians. But I'm particularly concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on the younger generation. You have heard from young people today about why this is so important. As a result, I plan to highlight, support, and encourage all those activities that can help young people to develop the life skills to be good, successful, and law-abiding citizens. At the Cumbria Community Foundation, we are privileged to receive funds from generous philanthropic individuals and organisations who can afford to donate, and we use this money to help address disadvantage in Cumbria. So why be philanthropic? Speaking of my own personal journey, I can say there are a number of elements. Firstly, the honest recognition that you have accumulated more wealth than you need. What I mean by that is, of course, you should be mindful of your own needs and those of your family. But what about the excess? Secondly, the recognition that your cash can really make a difference to your fellow man. Thirdly, the recognition that giving is joyful in its own right, and seeing your money put to work for the benefit of others is very special. And finally, the added bonus that HMRC encourage charitable donations by topping up your donation and providing tax breaks. The most powerful way of realising what difference donations can make is to visit some of the projects we support. As High Sheriff, I'll be making a lot of project visits this year. If you are thinking about donating, please let us know and come and join me on one of those project visit days. The next question is how to be philanthropic. This is where the Cumbria Community Foundation comes in. They do the heavy lifting of philanthropy. Through their unique knowledge of the need in Cumbria and the third sector organisations across the county, they can identify the places to allocate the grants focused on issues that matter to you. They make sure your hard-earned money is put to use well. They genuinely connect people who care with causes that matter. At Cumbria Communities Foundation, our ambition is to continue to grow and develop our grant making and our grant programmes to make a much bigger impact. Today, we are privileged to handle nearly 100 endowment funds, totaling over £25 million, and some substantial flow-through funds. Over the next year, our total grant making will exceed £3 million. Based on our analysis of Cumbria, it is quite clear that the need is massively higher than we can fund. On top of that, the charity sector is now in a funding crisis. One of the most uplifting experiences of the past year is the way that communities have come together to support each other. Community is like a muscle. Having grown stronger through exercising over the last year, we must find ways to retain that strength, otherwise the muscle will wither. The need for people to be supported and connected has never been greater. It is for this reason that we encourage you, if you can, to donate to the Cumbria Community Foundation so that we can help to enrich more lives. Thank you.
So thank you, David. Oliver, you wanting to ask a question? Would you like to unmute yourself?
Well, I was most impressed by what was said last, because as you will realise, Andy, I am probably the only survivor here today from the original trustees. And when I heard the chairman of the High Sheriff stating the case of the need for money, all I can say is that I would respectfully remind the assembled company of how it all started in John Friar Spedding's house with the then Lord Lieutenant James Cropper, and we had this meeting and several meetings without a penny or an official of any sort, and look what it has achieved. And I would endorse all that I have heard to state in the appeal for further investors, it were, because that's how I would see the subscription I pay every year, although I'm long since retired from there as an official member, an official, as it were. But it is a splendid investment, and that would be my final word, a splendid investment. I endorse exactly what the High Sheriff said.
Thank you very much indeed, Olive. That is very welcome and most kind of you to say those kind words. And you've enabled me to drop an element out of my script. So I'll just ask it's either Andrew or Anna Lee to put the link to the options for giving if people would like to follow Olive's kind words. But I think the most important thing I have to do now is to thank everyone for sharing your time with us this afternoon on what certainly where I'm sitting is a glorious day. You don't have to choose to be with us. I hope you found it really stimulating and interesting, and that I hope that you'll want to be involved with our work in the future. I'd also like to offer special thanks to our speakers and those people and organisations that made the event possible. I'd like to offer particular thanks to Paul Rowe, to Lindsay Buckle, to Janet Walker from Anti-Racist Cumbria, and Becky from Cumbria Youth Alliance. So thank you again for your time. Have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you again at future events.